Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Sitting at my desk yesterday, my good friend Justin contacted me and said, Steve, did you hear about this case out of New York that I think you might be interested in? And I said, I haven't heard about this. Tell me. And so he told me about it. And then he said, I can get you some documents too, by the way, if you really want to do a deep dive into this. And I said, I think I do. So it starts out like this. Safety first. Brooklyn judge tosses case after lawyer says he can't wear a face mask in court. This story is from the New York Daily News. Noah Goldberg wrote it. And it is exactly what you think it is. A lawyer preparing to try a case in court the other day said, I cannot keep going if I've got to wear a face mask. I'll wear a shield, but not a face mask because I'm having trouble breathing. And this is during jury selection. And so the judge said, well, unfortunately, the rules are the rules. You got to wear one. And so it went downhill from there. Brooklyn judge dismissed the lawsuit that was about to go to trial Thursday after one of the lawyers in the case said he would be unable to proceed while wearing a face mask. The Daily News has learned the jury trial was one of 10 cases set to go forward this week in Brooklyn as trials restarted throughout the state. It was tossed by the borough's chief administrative judge, who himself was hospitalized last spring with COVID-19. And that was when the virus went through the Brooklyn Supreme Court, and 2 judges were even killed by it. The judge here wrote, upon plaintiff's counsel's refusal to proceed with jury selection while wearing a face mask, this action is dismissed. And that's a copy of the order, which I'll get to in a second. The attorney is a 68-year-old Brooklyn practitioner. He had tried to go through jury selection with his face covered, according to the transcript, but he told the judge he was losing his breath, breaking into a sweat, and felt unable to continue because he might faint. He said, I can't breathe. I became lightheaded. I had to sit down. I don't contest the rule. I just am not physically able to comply with the rule to do my job as a lawyer. So the judge said, the trial is going to go forward. I'm not going to stop the trial on this ground. That is for sure. So here's the thing. Courts are opening back up again. And they're opening back up on a limited basis. And by that, they're often doing this where they get a very, very large courtroom, or the largest room they can find, spread the people out, the potential jurors, and then do a jury selection. And then they're going to try a case with the jury spread out. This was a civil case, a lawsuit. So I'm not sure. I'm assuming it would have a smaller jury, although it might not, but I'm not going to get into the nuances of that. I had a phone conversation with my friend Justin, who's a licensed attorney in New York as well as Michigan. And I was asking him to explain some of this stuff to me because some of the nuances of the court system in New York are different than the way they are in Michigan. And so Justin sent me a copy of the transcript. This is from the Supreme Court of the state of New York, County of Kings. And just to be confusing, in New York, the trial courts is where they have the Supreme Court, and up above is the appellate division. And so you start out in the Supreme Court here. And this would be the equivalent of, like, say, a circuit court in Michigan. It's the trial court where you're looking for $25,000 or more in damages. And this case apparently arose from a car accident. So it's a personal injury case. There's attorneys on both sides. And they run into the snag during jury selection. And the transcript, and I've mentioned this before, is that most, I have to say most because some courts don't, but most courts, especially the higher courts, actually have court reporters or a method to record the proceedings. And if you order a transcript, you can actually get a typewritten version of what happened in court, word for word. And it says, the court says this, the attorney says this, and it has the names and so on. So the court says, so counsel, I understand you have an application. I suspect he's saying what in other courts it might be is you have a motion, you something he wants the court to rule on. And the attorney says, I do, Your Honor. We were contacted, I believe, in the last 10 days to reference the opening up the courthouse, that we needed to come in and pick a jury. I came in and I had on a shield. I began with a shield. But I was told that I could not pick a jury unless I had a mask on. I complied with that. I attempted to do this for a couple of minutes. I had particular difficulty. Just talking to Your Honor right now with the mask, my nose fills. I can't breathe. And he's describing how large the room is and how he has a hard time projecting to the back because there's people who are 70 or 80 feet away. And he says, I had to project my voice and I became lightheaded. I had to sit down after 2 minutes. And then he says, I happen to like my adversary a lot, referring to his opposing counsel. And he says, but the problem is that I could not catch my breath. As I was sitting here, and I could not object. So he's watching jury selection, and for instance, his opponent said something that he wanted to object to, but he said that he missed the opportunity because he's out of breath. So he says, I couldn't say anything because I was trying to catch my breath from being on my feet and talking. So he goes on to explain all this, and he says, I don't contest the rule. He's not arguing about the rule. I just am not physically able to comply with the rule to do my job as a lawyer. So he asks that the jury be dismissed and that they perhaps adjourn this for a little while. And he points out, he says, look, I've been trying cases for 42 years. He's tried cases in front of this judge before. And he says, I'm not physically capable of doing it under these circumstances. Now, some people are going to ask, as did I, there's only 10 cases going forward. There must be others they could have chosen. And so the question is, would it have been that big of a deal to adjourn this case for this guy? And I suspect that the judge is probably thinking, if I adjourn the case for this guy, the next one's going to come in and go, I don't feel like doing one with a mask either. So courts do have, and by courts I mean judges, do have discretion to administer trials the way they see fit. So if you look at the Michigan court rules, for instance, or the equivalents in most other states, they've got actual rules as to how courts proceed with trials and so on. It'll actually say, here's how you do this, here's. And by the way, the court, the judge, has the final say on all of this because they're the ones who are there conducting the trial. So the attorney then says, I've been ready to proceed, but he goes, I cannot get into his head and what he feels. Obviously, I would never want somebody to feel adverse effects or feel disadvantages. As somebody who's very sick with COVID myself, I understand the issues with the problems of breathing. Now, he does object, and they have a little talk about whether or not he had said something objectionable the other guy could have objected to. But he says, there was some scheduling issues that we had to work out, blah, 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 blah. But he goes, if Mr. Greenwald, that's the other attorney, has a medical issue, there's nothing I can do to refute that. And he says, I am certainly a human being. I can understand that if he is uncomfortable and can't do it. Then he says, I request that we go forward. It puts me in an impossible position of trying to impugn or to question what my adversary is thinking. I know Mr. Greenwald a long time. I wouldn't do that. So he goes, I leave it in the court's hands. It's up to the court. So here's the thing. The court is listening to both sides. The one guy who is 68 years old says, I'm medically unable. I'm having a hard time breathing. We're trying to wear a mask, trying to project to the back of the room. I can't do this. So the judge says, look, I understand some of what you're saying. The idea that you can't project to the back of the room. And my friend Justin told me he's been in this courtroom many times. And the room that they use to pick juries is large because they bring in a very, very large pool from whom to choose, and they pick people out of that. And so they're purposely using the big room so they can spread everyone out. So the judge says, hey, I got an idea. He says, I can accommodate you, and I want to continue to accommodate you to the extent that I can. So if the problem is having a big courtroom, I get it. It is a very big space. There are people in the back, so it's hard to project. I can give you a courtroom like this size to select in. So apparently this motion is being heard in a smaller courtroom. He says, that much I can accommodate you. But I'm telling you the trial is going to go forward. It was noticed a long time ago, referring to the notices being sent. I'm not going to stop the trial on this ground, that is for sure. So I'm telling you also, and I want to caution you, if you refuse to go forward, I'm going to have no option but to dismiss the case. So think about it. If you want a smaller courtroom like this, maybe it's easier to work in, you got it. And the attorney says, I want the record to reflect I'm speaking with great difficulty. I want the record to reflect that I'm sweating profusely. And I want the record to reflect that I had to sit down now because I was short of breath. He says, the problem is, Your Honor, I just can't do this. I'm tired. I was at home after the COVID. I was furloughed from my firm. I'm 68 years old, recently had an operation. He goes through all this stuff. And he says, I can't breathe, Your Honor. What I'm thinking about now is not what I'm going to say. I'm thinking about taking my next breath. I cannot do it. If you're going to force me to say I can't proceed and you give me a dismissal, then I'm going to have to accept that because physically I'm unable to proceed. And the court says, well, it is beyond my authority. These are statewide protocols about wearing masks in court. many, many millions, tens of millions of people, maybe hundreds of millions of people do proceed with masks. He says, you seem to be, for all appearances, and I don't know what's going on internally, but for all appearances of the world, you seem to be proceeding just fine. Judge says, you seem to be rather eloquent. So I'm going to, now he gives him one last chance. He says, unless there's another lawyer in your firm who can come in and substitute, could another attorney come in and take care of this? And the attorney says, no. No one at my firm can handle this. The court says, okay, so even in a smaller courtroom, you can't do it. You can't bring in another attorney. You simply cannot go on wearing a mask. And the attorney says, Your Honor, look at me. The court says, you look fine to me. I'm not a doctor, but... And the attorney says, I'm dripping wet here, Your Honor. And the court says, okay, it hurts me to do it, but case dismissed. I'll give you an order shortly. And so Justin got me a copy of the order. It's handwritten. And the judge simply wrote, upon oral argument on the record, upon plaintiff's counsel's refusal to proceed with jury selection while wearing a face mask, this action is dismissed. And it's signed by the judge. And unfortunately, it was dismissed with prejudice, which means that it's dismissed, it's over. The only remedy here is for them to file an appeal and set it up on appeal and hope that a court of appeal listening to this is going to say, well, the judge could have adjourned it. But they're also possibly going to look at it and say, well, the judge said I can get you in a smaller courtroom. I can make accommodations for you. By the way, you work at a firm. Can't another attorney come in and take care of this? And so it's quite possible the court on appeal is going to say, everyone else is managing to do it. You got to do it too. So it's an interesting story. But, I've mentioned before about all of the unexpected side effects of COVID, not the actual condition, but the things that are happening in our society, everything from, people not paying rent to, the scams going on with the unemployment benefits and so on. And so, courts were put on hold. And I know attorneys who are in the middle of cases. I've mentioned this before. I have a friend who's doing a murder trial. His client's sitting in jail and has been there for hundreds of days because the court literally just said, everyone go home. We'll tell you when to come back. And that was in March of last year. And so courts are slowly opening back up. And as they're opening back up, it's not business as usual. In fact, in some courts, they're literally saying, okay, we're going to have a trial in this courtroom, but not this one. This courtroom, but not this one. And so then in this courtroom, we're going to spread all the jurors out. And, so everything is being done differently. And so when they came back into court on this one, apparently they were notified quite a distance time-wise and said, this case is going to go to trial and we're going to pick a jury on this particular date. And they gave them a date in the future. So they were also told, you're going to be picking a jury in that big courtroom that we pick juries in, and you're going to have to be wearing a mask. So when the guy shows up in court and he's wearing the face shield, okay, it's not the mask over the face, but it's the face shield. He shows up with that, and apparently he can breathe with that and speak with that. But the court administrators, somebody pulled him aside and said, that's not appropriate. The rules require you to be wearing a mask, not a shield. So when he's wearing the mask, he says he can't breathe. He has a hard time projecting. And the fact that he can't breathe. And I don't know if he has any medical conditions. This is something that Justin and I were discussing, is that there are people who have difficulty breathing just on a daily basis. And so add to that wearing a mask while wearing a suit in a courtroom that might be hot. I've been in courtrooms where they had problems with the HVAC systems. And a friend of mine actually invited me down. He said, Steve, I'm trying a case right now. It's a hilarious case. You want to come down and watch it? And I showed up at Wayne County Circuit Court and walked to the courtroom. It was like 3 billion degrees. It was like walking on the surface of the sun, only warmer. And I look around, and all of the attorneys have their suit jackets off on the backs of their chairs, and it's like straight out of Inherit the Wind. Guys doing this with fans and... And normally you don't see anybody, out of the uniform. And during a break, I said to my friend, I go, what's going on? And he goes, the AC broke apparently just either on that floor or in that courtroom. And it was baking in there, so there are all kinds of situations that you have to put up with. But if the guy's got some kind of breathing issue, we were discussing this, and the question is, like, for instance, what if the guy came in with a doctor's note? What if? He didn't, but what if? What if he came in with a note and actually said, my patient actually has a breathing condition where he cannot breathe. And the guy's 68 years old and he might have an issue. I don't know. But what the court's saying here is, look, there's a rule on the books. The rule's been on the books for a while. You knew the rule was there. We sent you notices weeks ago about this rule on the books. You show up and you cannot abide by that rule. Now, you tell me that one of the problems is the size of the room. Fine, we'll put you in a smaller room. You say that won't do it. Then, as I point out, you work at a law firm with other attorneys. Why can't one of them come in and cover this? And that's a strange one, because I've worked in firms with other attorneys, and we used to cover stuff for each other all the time. And that is a common practice. Now, a trying of a case is actually a little more in depth than some of the typical things you might do. So it's not uncommon that you're at work one day in a firm with a bunch of attorneys, and you're there at 4:30, and someone sticks their head in the door and goes, do you have anything on your calendar for tomorrow? And you go, why? Because it's coming. And they say, I've got a conflict. I got to be in two places at once. I got a pretrial conference here, and I got a pretrial conference there. And you say, what are the cases about? And what you try to do as the person who's about to get pulled into something is you try to figure out which one's easier or closer to the office. So they say, well, I got a pretrial conference up in Sandusky, Michigan, and a pretrial conference in Royal Oak, Michigan. And your office is in Royal Oak. You go, oh, can I take the one that's in Royal Oak? And covering a pretrial is something where you literally walk in, you say, hi, I'm the attorney from the office. The other attorney had a conflict, but I know enough about the case where we can do the pretrial. Trying a case is more involved, and so it might be more difficult. But here's your choice. Either the case gets dismissed with prejudice, or someone else comes in and tries the case. That's what it probably boiled down to here. And the dismissal with prejudice means that the client gets nothing. It's like they went to trial and lost on the merits. And so the next question, of course, is, wait, what about the client? And of course, the client right now has got probably a malpractice claim against this firm, because they're going to say, we signed a retainer agreement with this firm. Firm agreed to go to trial with us. In the morning of the trial, the attorney said he couldn't proceed. And on the record, the judge said, look, we'll make a bunch of accommodations for you, or you can have another attorney come in and do this. And he said no, and the case got dismissed. And so if you're the client and you just got zero because your attorney couldn't proceed under the rules that were posted, that might be where this is going. So somewhere down the road, I told Justin, please update me. Let me know what happens on this case. I'm curious, because the case as of right now is dismissed. The client got nothing. And it's making headlines. The story's been all over the place. I typed in Brooklyn judge COVID, and a bunch of stories popped up. So we'll see what happens on appeal. But it very well could be that the appeal does not get granted, and it simply might turn into a malpractice action against the firm. So safety first, Brooklyn judge tosses a case after a lawyer says you can't wear a face mask in court. That's the story from the New York Daily News, written by Noah Goldberg. And I got to thank Justin for tipping me off to this one. Thanks a lot. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Practice random acts of kindness.